Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly behind the stone walls of a Benedictine monastery. Damp, candlelit, and echoing faintly with a whisper of wool robes brushing against worn flagstones. You can almost feel the chill of the early morning air clinging to your skin as you pad across the cloister, where ivy curls lazily over cracked pillars and a single bell tolls like it's still thinking about waking up. You're not here for confession or even for silence, though you'll find plenty of that. No, you're here for something far more peculiar. Deep dive into the surprisingly dedicated world of monastic tooth hygiene. Because yes, medieval monks, those devout, scripture-copying, herb-growing hermits, had custom toothpicks. And they took them very, very seriously. You probably won't survive the lentil gruel or the 3:30 a.m. prayer bells, but you might come away with a new respect for their dental discipline. Or at least an appreciation for just how much cheese can get stuck in molars before God gets involved. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Strich. The gates of the abbey groan as they open, heavy and unwilling, like everything in this place seems to be.
You vox loli, because the monks don't hurry.
They glide, practically. Everything about this place whispers discipline, from the sanded-down stone benches in the garden to the little wooden sandals lined up neatly outside the scriptorium.
Your robes, borrowed for the day, itch in strange places.
You're pretty sure they weren't designed for comfort.
Or movement.
Or anything besides suppressing joy. But here you are, stepping into a world where each moment is deliberate, each breath considered, and every meal is frankly a culinary prank. But we'll get to that. Right now, the sun is barely grazing the horizon, and you follow a slow-moving line of monks into the chapel for the first of many, many prayers.
A flickering lantern lights your way, and you pass under a low arch where the carved inscription reads, in Latin, Ora et labora, pray and work.
It's the motto around here, and they take both parts equally seriously. But there's a hidden third commandment not inscribed in stone: don't forget to floss. Well, not floss exactly. More like pick. You'll notice something odd as the monks settle into their pews. Several of them reach discreetly into the sleeves of their habits or little pockets sewn beneath their sashes and withdraw what looks like a tiny, ornately carved stick.
Toothpicks.
Every monk has one. And not just any splinter from the garden fence. These are handmade, often lovingly shaped from olive wood or animal bone, with subtle engravings or polished surfaces. They're used with such grace, just a flick between the molars, a dainty pause, a tiny clack as they're slipped back into their holders. It's a choreography so precise it's almost a form of prayer. What's remarkable is not just the toothpicks themselves, but the fact that they exist here at all. This is a world where indulgence is sin, where pleasure is suspect, and where your time is meant to be spent contemplating eternity, not scraping barley husks out of your back teeth.
And yet, here we are.
The reality is, monks were obsessed with order.
With systems.
With cleanliness, not necessarily in the soapy modern sense, but in the spiritual one. And oral hygiene, believe it or not, was part of that order. You weren't just maintaining your body, you were protecting the vessel that allowed you to chant psalms, read Latin, and avoid heresy. In short, you were guarding the mouth that served God. So there you sit, watching the monk beside you ease a slender goosebone pick along his gum line. He's not flaunting it, not exactly. But you get the feeling he's a little proud of that pick. The way he holds it, the slight flourish, says, I carved this myself during Lent last year. And yes, it does double as a bookmark. As the chant begins, your mind drifts. The air smells of old books, wax, and something vaguely medicinal. Probably the rosemary oil they rub on their temples to keep headaches at bay during long copying sessions. The voices rise and fall in a low drone that somehow makes you sleepier and more alert at the same time. You notice one monk with an unusually thick pick tucked behind his ear, like a medieval pencil. Another wears his on a small chain, tucked discreetly under his scapular. Historians still argue whether these personalized picks were permitted by abbey rules or simply tolerated. Some believe the rule of Saint Benedict encouraged practical self-care, while others argue that ornamentation, even of the tooth, was a dangerous vanity. But monastic communities were like tiny, silent democracies, and each abbey had its own customs, its own quiet debates, its own unwritten rules. The prayers end, and the line shifts toward the refectory, where breakfast, if you can call it that, awaits.
A thin barley porridge and a small piece of hard bread.
You take your portion and sit with the others in stone silence.
No talking. Just eating.
And the occasional, nearly imperceptible click of a toothpick against a bowl. It's hard not to giggle, really. Here you are, surrounded by men who've taken vows of silence and chastity, who have given up everything for a life of quiet devotion, and yet they have opinions about toothpicks. About shape, sharpness, storage. About whether goose bone lasts longer than you. About whether it's proper to polish a toothpick, or let it wear smooth through use. And as you take your first awkward bite of barley porridge, which immediately fuses itself to your back molars, you realize, they have a point. You reach into your own robe and pull out the olive wood pick you were given at the gate. It's warm from your body heat and carved with a tiny spiral near the grip. It works, surprisingly well.
Welcome to your new life of prayer, porridge, and plaque control. At bay.
You inhale deeply, the rosemary tang mixing with the faint scent of beeswax and parchment. The singing begins low, almost like a hum in your chest, as if the walls themselves are joining in. But even as the ancient Latin verses float over you, your thoughts are preoccupied, not with salvation, but with the astonishing fact that tooth care is already happening this early.
You shuffle along behind the others into the cloister walk, where the rising sun slices through the colonnade in golden beams.
The monks begin their morning routines in near silence, save for the scuff of sandals and the occasional cough, politely suppressed. Some head to the garden, others to the library, and a few, those on kitchen duty, vanish behind a heavy wooden door that smells faintly of onions and penitence. But one group, perhaps 6 or 7 monks, heads toward the washroom.
You follow.
It's not what you'd expect. No running water, no ivory tiles, just a long wooden trough carved with care, fed by a cool spring that trickles from a pipe made of lead, because that was the best idea they had back then. Each monk lines up and waits his turn. There's a wooden shelf above the trough, and on it, rows of simple personal items, cloths, a shared comb, a few dull razors, and yes, small bundles wrapped in linen. You watch as Brother Edric, an elderly monk with eyebrows like hedgehogs, unwraps his cloth to reveal a gleaming toothpick carved from what looks like cherry wood. It's worn at the tip, smoothed with years of use.
He handles it like a relic.
He bends forward, not toward the mirror, because there isn't one, but toward a polished sheet of tin nailed to the stone wall. It distorts his reflection just enough to hide any wrinkles. And there he begins the ritual, slow, practiced, and precise. Now you might be wondering, why all this fuss? Why are monks, who famously ate the same dull foods and avoided vanity like it was the plague, so committed to cleaning between their teeth? The answer is layered like a good lasagna, which unfortunately, they never got to eat. First, let's talk spiritual hygiene. In the medieval mindset, bodily order reflected spiritual discipline. The Rule of Saint Benedict, the foundational guidebook for Western monastic life, didn't list dental hygiene directly, but it called for moderation, cleanliness, and respect for the body. After all, your mouth delivered prayers, read sacred texts, and instructed novices. It was a holy tool, and heaven help you if it smelled like turnip mash. Secondly, monks shared nearly everything: dormitories, meals, even bathing water. A bad tooth infection wasn't just your problem, it could become everyone's problem. There's some evidence, found in marginalia, those cheeky little doodles monks loved to draw in the corners of manuscripts, that toothaches were a recurring communal annoyance. In one manuscript from the 12th century, a tiny monk is seen kicking another in the face, under a Latin caption loosely translated as, "For the love of silence, get it pulled." Third, and perhaps most surprisingly, medieval monastic routines had the time for this kind of care. Between morning prayers, breakfast, and the beginning of labor duties, there was a small sliver of time that monks used for personal upkeep.
Some combed their hair. Some oiled their feet.
Some sharpened their quills. And some flossed with a sliver of whalebone. And now here you are following suit. A novice monk hands you your own pick, a crude little thing whittled from hazelwood. It's not elegant, and you suspect it was someone's practice carving.
Still, you copy Brother Edric's motion. It feels strange at first. Not unpleasant. Just intimate in a way.
Like brushing your teeth in front of strangers on a camping trip, but holier. One of the monks passes you a small bowl of warm water steeped with thyme and sage.
It's for rinsing.
The mixture smells oddly like soup, but works surprisingly well. As you swish, you learn another quirk of this place. Monks aren't supposed to spit. Or if they must, it has to be done discreetly, a gentle release, into designated spit pots, tucked discreetly beneath the benches. Spitting loudly? Practically a venial sin. You sit back down on the worn stone bench. The air is still crisp, but the rising sun has started to warm your robe. You glance over and see a younger monk struggling with a bit of oatcake caught in a rear molar.
His pick is too blunt.
Brother Edric notices and, with great solemnity, offers him a spare. It's a touching gesture, more touching even than the sharing of bread. In this place, toothpicks are the real communion. Historians still argue whether these personal picks were always allowed, or whether certain abbeys banned them as unnecessary vanity. Some abbots believed the mouth was God's trumpet, worthy of tuning. Others thought a man with clean teeth was likely to be full of pride. The debate never ended, and in some monasteries, it quietly continues. As you return your pick to its linen wrap and place it back on the shelf, you feel oddly grounded. Like you've just taken part in a ritual both absurd and profound. You are, for better or worse, one of them now.
A monk with a toothpick.
And your day has only just begun. You sit back down on the worn stone bench. The air is still crisp, but the rising sun has started to warm your robe. One of the older monks pulls a hood over his head and begins to hum quietly. Not a hymn, just a tune he must have known since he was a boy. You notice a few others adjusting their belts, checking their sandals, or, curiously, sharpening the ends of their toothpicks on smooth bits of stone. Why sharpen a toothpick? Isn't that a little excessive? Well, not really, because in this world, the humble toothpick isn't just a hygiene tool. It's a badge of routine.
A symbol of order.
And for some monks, even a point of minor competition. While the rule of Saint Benedict urges humility, humans remain human, even when wrapped in wool robes and solemn vows. There are quiet rivalries over whose pick is smoothest, whose tip lasts the longest, or who carves the tiniest spiral. Of course, no one says this aloud. That would be prideful. But the side eyes in the washroom speak volumes. You pick up a few whispered names. There's Brother Anselm, who carves his picks from imported olive wood, an indulgence that raises some eyebrows. And Brother Oswin, who prefers boar bristle. Then there's Sister Margarita, from the nearby convent, who visits monthly and uses a pick of copper. Historians still argue whether copper was genuinely used in this way or if it's simply a poetic flourish from later retellings. But either way, it's a nice image, a flash of metal catching morning light between psalms. There's even talk, quiet naturally, of monks adding flavor to their picks. A quick dip in mint oil, or even clove, if you knew someone in the apothecary. These additions aren't entirely about vanity. Mint was believed to aid digestion, and clove was used to dull tooth pain, long before anyone dreamt of Novocaine. The notion of a monk, sitting quietly in the scriptorium, gently sucking a clove-infused toothpick while copying Leviticus? Surprisingly plausible. And there's another layer to all this. Hygiene was not just spiritual, it was social. When monks gathered for communal meals, they sat side by side at long wooden tables, sharing bread, soup, and wine from the same ladles.
Bad Brit wasn't just inconvenient.
It disrupted the peace. And so, the humble toothpick became your quiet ally. A way of maintaining boundaries in a world that had very few. You didn't have your own room, your own clothes, or even your own spoon, but you did have your own toothpick. Often kept tucked in your sleeve hem or belt pouch, sometimes carved with tiny initials, technically forbidden. It was a rare piece of personal identity in a life defined by uniformity.
As the morning sun climbs sich her, Brother Edric leans over and whispers, "Come."
The librarian will be expecting you. His voice is dry and precise, like parchment left too long in the sun. You follow him through a narrow archway that opens into the cloister garden. The garden is alive with soft motion, bees drifting lazily over lavender, cabbages glistening with dew, a tabby cat curled beneath the rosemary. Edric moves with purpose, his sandals flapping faintly as he leads you to a squat stone building at the garden's edge.
The scriptorium.
Inside, it's dim and dry. Dust floats in lazy spirals through thin beams of light. Rows of desks hold manuscripts, ink pots, and scraping tools. Monks sit hunched, not in prayer, but in posture of total concentration. The smell is a curious mix of parchment, ink, old candle wax, and, somehow, fennel. You realize it's coming from Brother Tiberius, who is chewing a fennel-stalk toothpick while illuminating the margin of a psalter with delicate gold leaf.
He doesn't look up. Edric hands you a small wooden box.
Inside, wrapped in a bit of linen, is a set of carved picks. Your task today, he murmurs, is to copy the list of herbal rinses from the infirmary manual.
And ven jo als groveri, clean your mood before you rest.
Clean mouth is a rested mind. You sit, ink your quill, and glance at the picks.
Birch, je, elder.
Each one different, each one smooth as bone.
You smile, just a little.
Your stomach grumbles quietly, and you remember that breakfast is barley gruel again, with maybe a fig if you're lucky. But the idea of a flavored pick, tucked into your sleeve for later, feels oddly comforting. That and the soft scratch of quill on parchment might just get you through the day. From outside the window, you hear distant chanting begin again. Another hour has passed. Your stomach grumbles quietly, and you glance around, wondering if anyone else heard. But the room is a still life, every monk locked in his own rhythm of scratching quill strokes, shallow breathing, and the occasional faint creak of wood. A bell hasn't rung yet, so you press on, dipping your pen once more into the ink and drawing the first line of your copy. Rinse of sage and vinegar, for the cooling of inflamed gums. The recipes are oddly soothing to transcribe. You picture yourself boiling rosemary in rainwater, letting it steep overnight in an earthen pot, then gently pouring it into a horn cup to rinse before bed. Somehow, these small herbal rituals feel like tiny pockets of control in an otherwise rigid world. And of course, they tie right back to the monks' obsession with oral hygiene, because to them, the body wasn't merely flesh. It was a vessel.
A sanctuary of God.
Even a toothache could be interpreted as divine reproof. Outside, the muffled clang of the mid-morning bell echoes across the courtyard. You and the others rise in near unison, every movement choreographed from years of practice. You file silently back to the refectory, where the first meal of the day awaits. It's simple fare, a small loaf of rye bread, a wedge of cheese, a cup of thin ale.
You hear slowly, mindfully.
Around you, brothers nod gently to one another but do not speak. Conversation during meals is reserved for feast days or special occasions. On other days, a designated reader recites aloud from scripture, so the word might nourish both body and spirit. Today's passage is from Ecclesiastes.
So meeting about time and purpose and the length.
Fitting, you think, as you reach for your pick. The birch one feels smooth and solid between your fingers. You gently work it between your molars, trying not to draw attention. Though the practice is accepted, it's still considered discreet, almost private.
Like scratching an each or humming a tune wen no ohnes Wettchen.
But there's something satisfyingly tactile about it. And honestly, it beats chewing on stale bread crusts to work debris loose.
A soft chuckle to your left.
Brother Oswin again, holding up a pick carved like a tiny fish. Found it in the apothecary's trash, he whispers, with a twinkle. They're making charms for the bishop's visit. I took a spare. You glance around, suppressing a grin. Humor, though rarely loud, runs quietly beneath monastic life like a spring under flagstones. It bubbles up when you least expect it, through winks, carved puns and toothpicks shaped like birds.
Still, rules are rules.
And brother said, the prior, raises an eyebrow from down the table. Oswin tucks the fish away, his eyes cast meekly downward. You both return to your meal.
After breakfast, the community disperses.
Some head to the orchards, others to the workshops. You follow a small group to the infirmary, your duties rotating this week toward the care of the sick. The infirmary is not what you might expect. No beds lined with white sheets or moaning patients. Instead, it's more like a gentle retreat, soft light filtering through horn windows, dried herbs hanging in aromatic bundles, quiet prayers murmured like lullabies. The sick rest on straw mattresses, wrapped in clean linen. Most suffer minor ailments, coughs, joint pain, seasonal colds.
You help Brother Gildas mix a poultice of comfrey and honey, mies instructions slow and deliberate. Not too thick, not too hot.
Healing thrives in balance, not haste. His hands, though wrinkled, move with practiced ease. You notice a familiar wooden pick tucked behind his ear. He uses it to stir the mixture, then wipes it clean and returns it to its place. Dual purpose, like most tools here. One patient, Sister Agnes from the convent across the river, winces as she adjusts on her cot. She's been fighting a bad tooth for days, her face slightly swollen. You offer her a fennel water rinse, prepared that morning. The vinegar might sting, you say gently, but the herbs will help draw out the heat. She nods and sips slowly.
Thank you. And you have a kind way about you.
Not all monks do. You smile, flattered, but unsure how to respond. Compliments feel strange in a place built on humility. Later, you clean the bowls, your sleeves damp and dusted with dried mint flakes. The infirmary's quietness lingers, wrapping around you like a woolen shawl. Even your hunger seems to have quieted.
As you walk back towards the cloister, you pass a carpentry shop.
A young novice is carving thin slivers from a chunk of cherry wood.
He glances up.
Need a new pick?
You hesitate, ten note.
Mine's worn smooth. He passes you one, still warm from his hands. It smells faintly sweet. You test its point, just sharp enough, but not dangerous. That evening in your cell, you sit by the window slit, watching the last sliver of sun vanish behind the hills.
The pick lies in your palm like a feet hair.
One tiny object, carved in silence, shaped by hands guided by faith and habit and a touch of vanity. It's not just about teeth. It's about rhythm. Identity. Care. You twirl it once between your fingers and slide it into your pouch. You rise from your stool, wiping your hands on your robe, the scent of crushed herbs still clinging to your fingers. sharp green, slightly sweet.
Outside, a light mist blanket cyclivistas.
Your feet make soft thuds on the damp flagstones as you make your way toward the scriptorium again, but this time, your mind is elsewhere. You're thinking about that fennel water rinse, about Sister Agnes's weary face, and about how many of the monks around you are carrying their own silent discomforts, worn beneath woolen robes and quiet smiles. Monastic medicine is oddly intimate. It's a far cry from the bustling infirmaries or bleeding charts of later centuries. Here, ailments are understood to be as much spiritual as physical. When someone complains of a toothache, it might prompt a prayer for patience. If a mouth bleeds too much, perhaps they've been holding in anger. And while they'll happily hand you a garlic poultice or a mug of sage tea, they'll also gently remind you to confess, just in case that aching molar has more to do with your soul than your enamel. You find it oddly comforting. Like life has layers of meaning you've barely begun to peel back. As you settle again among the other scribes, the air smells faintly of ink and beeswax.
Your Seat is warm from the morning's walk.
You lift your quill and trace the lines of a new passage, this one a treatise on oral care by a long-dead French abbot whose obsession with teeth rivals even Brother Gildas's. He writes of gum harmony and the sacred brushing motion. And while his tone is deadly serious, you can't help but smile. You imagine him 200 years ago, hunched over a candle, furiously diagramming the best angles for scrubbing one's molars with a chewed hazel twig. Historians still argue whether some of these hygiene manuals were actually intended for public reading or were more internal documents. Early wellness routines shared within elite circles of literate monastics. The line between medicine and meditation was blurrier back then. Your own notes are neat, almost meditative in themselves. You write slowly, each letter shaped with care, as if the very act of writing might ward off decay, physical and otherwise. The sun shifts outside the narrow window, casting your shadow long across the page. Brother Dunstone slips in beside you, silently. He's older, stooped, and rarely speaks unless spoken to.
But today, he brings a small cloth bundle.
He unwraps it slowly to reveal several unusual toothpicks, some bone, others horn, one clearly carved from an old ivory comb. He gestures for you to look. This one, he rasps, tapping a slender bronze pick with a looped end, came from a trader who passed through on pilgrimage. Claimed it was once the property of a Moorish scholar.
Balancet, isnt.
He places it in your palm, and you feel its odd weight, dense, cool, slightly curved. You ask what the loop is for. To hang it on a chain, he answers simply. Or a prayer cord. You nod, still cradling it carefully. And for a moment, you imagine monks across faraway lands, each with their own peculiar tooth tool, some practical, others ceremonial. In Constantinople, perhaps, toothpicks made of amber. In Tang China, maybe silk threads used as floss. In Timbuktu, fig twigs dipped in honeyed water. It's a quiet web, really. A strange network of oral care, binding people across empires who never once met, but all hated that feeling of bread stuck between the molars. You return the bronze pick, and Brother Dunstone gives a small, satisfied grunt. Then he hands you a scroll, the origin of which you don't recognize. It's a recipe collection.
But not for meals. Dental tonics, he murmurs. From Avicenna.
Translated by a monk in Lyon. You carefully unroll it. The script is tiny, Latinized Arabic, written with tight, looping strokes. The first entry reads, "For mouth that bleeds without cause, rinse of alum, thyme, and cooled wine." There's something about it that feels timeless, like you could bottle it and sell it at a sleepy apothecary in modern Paris, and no one would question its origin. You copy one of the formulas into your own notebook.
Then 2. Then 3. The sky outside shifts again.
Afternoon slides softly in, unnoticed.
A robin lands on the sill, chirps once, and vanishes.
When the bell calls you to none, the mid-afternoon prayer, you move slower.
More thoughtful.
You realize how easy it is, in the quiet flow of monastic hours, to lose your sense of where you end and the routine begins. There's something strangely appealing about that. To be dissolved in structure. To let each moment be prescribed for you like a dose of calming medicine.
Back in the chapel, incense cools toward the rafters, and your knees sink into the cool stone floor. You close your eyes.
You think about teeth.
About prayers.
About the small, persistent rituals that hold this life together. Issues into the mist like it was never there. You pause, quill mid-air, eyes still fixed on the empty spot it left behind. There's something oddly poetic about it. How little things come and go without fanfare in a place like this.
Toothpicks, birds, headaches. Even time. Especially time.
Brother Gildas enters the room with the deliberate shuffle of someone who refuses to rush, even when clearly in a hurry. He carries a shallow wooden box covered with a fraying velvet cloth, and you can already tell from the way he guards it that this is something special. He sets it down near your station with a soft thump. A few scribes glance over, but no one speaks. Gildas lifts the cloth like he's unveiling treasure, and in a way he is, a gleaming collection of custom toothpicks, neatly arranged in a velvet-lined groove, each nestled like a jewel.
You lean closer.
One is whittled from cherry wood, so smooth it looks varnished. Another is carved from brass, tipped with a tiny scraper on one end and an impossibly fine bristle on the other. There's even a piece shaped like a miniature rake, more art than instrument, really.
Gildas does and speak for a moment.
He just watches your reaction. Trial models, he finally says.
Some are mine.
Some from Benedictine houses across the channel. He picks up a tiny parchment folded into quarters and opens it with calloused fingers.
Descriptions, he explains. See this one.
He points to a rather squat instrument made of bone, blunt at both ends. That came from Cluny. Called it the tooth pleaser. Claimed it was used by their abbot, though frankly, I suspect it was just a glorified cheese knife repurposed during Lent. You chuckle, not loudly. Just enough for Gildas to crack the faintest smile, an honor, considering he usually saves those for sunsets and good brie. The toothpicks become a little parade of stories. Each has a supposed origin, a ritual, sometimes even a prayer. One monk reportedly whispered a psalm while cleaning his back teeth, to stay humble. Another had his toothpick made from the antler of a deer struck down on the feast of Saint Apollonia, patroness of toothaches. Historians still argue whether some of these rituals were pious inventions or earnest superstition. One theory suggests that the monastic obsession with oral hygiene was symbolic, a way to cleanse speech, to ensure the words one uttered were as pure as the body they came from. Another posits that monks just had a lot of fish bones to deal with. As Gildas hands you one of the simpler designs, a thin stick of polished elder, you notice the end is charred black.
Not burnt but singed. Fire sealed, he says.
To keep it from splintering.
You nod, impressed.
There's a monastery near Mainz, Gildas continues, where they pass down a toothpick made from the same olive tree branch, year after year. When it wears out, they carve another from the same root. Tradition says the tree was planted by a monk who claimed St. Luke appeared to him in a dream and told him to stop picking his teeth with the corner of the psalter.
You raise your eyebrows.
That's oddly specific.
Gildas shrugs.
Well, saints can be fussy. That gets a real laugh from you, and you feel something loosen in your chest, like the tension you didn't even notice had finally uncoiled. You're invited to try one of the picks. Gildas hands over a curved iron tool with a small bead at the end, almost like a dental Q-tip. You bring it to your mouth, gently probing along your lower molars. There's a surprising tenderness to the gesture.
It feels ceremonial.
Like cleaning away the remnants of more than just food. In the stillness, you begin to imagine what future generations might think, should one of these instruments survive the centuries. Would they see it as proof of medieval vanity? Or perhaps a clue to a monastic world far more human than people usually imagine, where dental care wasn't just survival, but a way of staying connected to rhythm, to ritual, to each other? The sunlight tilts again, and the box of picks shimmers gold. Later, as the monks gather for evening prayer, you notice more of them than usual subtly checking their teeth before filing into the chapel. Brother Oswin, always self-conscious about his breath, swishes a bit of fennel water behind the herb garden wall. Even Gildas, old and proud, slips one of his handcrafted picks into his robe pocket like a priest might tuck away a relic.
You follow suit.
And as you sit through the slow, droning verses of Vespers, your tongue absently explores the new smoothness between your back teeth. The chant surrounds you, low and warm like a woolen blanket pulled to the chin.
The world narrows to candlelit, sandalwood, and the faint taste of coppery herbs.
You drift. Not to sleep, not yet, but to a place somewhere between silence and sound, where your jaw doesn't ache, your breath is sweet, and everyone's secrets are tucked into the grooves of a wooden box, sealed by velvet, and stored for another quiet day.
Backslash.
Of rosemary-infused water before slipping his tiny cedar pick into a fold of his robe.
No one comments, of course.
Monks aren't the gossiping kind, not out loud at least. But there's an understanding, a quiet camaraderie, in these little acts of bodily care tucked between grander duties of soul-keeping. You walk alongside them in the cloister, trailing behind slightly, just enough to let your mind drift without bumping into the back of someone's habit. You think about how these toothpicks, these tiny, easily lost pieces of wood and metal, are becoming something of a monastic language. A silent one, spoken only in gestures. There's a debate whispered now and then in the scriptorium, often sparked by Gildas or one of the newer brothers who just came from the coast. Were toothpicks merely tools, or were they sacred objects? Historians still argue whether monastic communities intentionally imbued their grooming habits with spiritual symbolism, or if the meaning was added by later centuries of overzealous scholars. But walking here, in the slow hush of evening, you feel that truth might be somewhere in the middle. You recall an earlier conversation with Brother Edric, a monk whose skill in icon painting is matched only by his baffling habit of quoting classical Latin philosophers during chores. You know, he said once, squinting at the polished end of his ivory toothpick, Seneca believed that cleanliness of the body reflects clarity of the mind. Perhaps that's why the rule of Saint Benedict places such strange emphasis on the small things. You asked him if Saint Benedict had ever mentioned toothpicks specifically. Edric had shrugged. Not in so many words. But silence, stability, and a clean mouth? Those go hand in hand.
You smile at the memory. Outside, the air smells like cold stone and rosemary, stiert bei the breze winding trug the herbgarten.
You pass the trellises, each one neat, geometric, austere, yet somehow comforting. Lavender and sage, thyme and mint. All planted, you were told, to ease digestion and sweeten breath. One monk, years ago, tried to chew on thyme sprigs instead of using a pick. The attempt lasted less than a week. He claimed his gums itched for 3 days afterward. Inside the refectory, the toothpick box now sits in a small niche, between the daily reading board and a carved wooden reliquary holding what's believed to be a sliver of Saint Apollonia's molar. You're not entirely sure if that's authentic, but few are willing to test their faith against a relic with such painfully appropriate provenance. Dinner tonight is pottage with barley and turnips.
No bones. No fish. No splinters.
But even so, you notice a few brothers quietly slipping picks from their sleeves after the meal, performing their ritual in thoughtful silence. You reach for your own pick, a sleek one, recently given to you by Gildas. It's made of juniper, faintly fragrant, with a notched handle for grip. You lean against a stone pillar and begin the familiar movement. It's not about hygiene anymore. It's become something else, like sketching or praying, or smoothing the same patch of cloth over and over. A gesture of rhythm.
A pattern. A way of tracing time with your fingers.
You think about the stories these monks never write down, the 1,000 tiny routines that won't end up in any chronicle, that won't be inked into the margins of holy texts. Stories passed through hands instead of scrolls. Through toothpicks of all things. Monastic memory, Gildas had called it once.
Not what we write. What we repeat.
There's comfort in that idea. And so, as the candles flicker low and the bells toll gently for Compline, you tuck your toothpick away, not because you're finished, but because there will always be tomorrow. And besides, you'll need something to do after the barley stew. The bell for Compline fades into the hush of the stone corridors, echoing down from the high tower like a soft reminder that the day is gently closing its eyes. You follow the line of monks through the darkened cloister, feet brushing over smooth flagstones worn low by centuries of identical steps. The scent of beeswax, parchment, and evening herbs clings to the cool air. By now, your toothpick is safely hidden again, tucked inside your habit like a monk's version of a pocket watch. There's no need for it tonight. Not unless you've made the ill-advised choice to sneak a late turnip from the kitchen garden. But you wouldn't dream of such scandal. Instead, your mind drifts to the scriptorium, the beating heart of the abbey's intellect, and an unlikely hub of oral hygiene. The scriptorium is where parchment rustles like dry leaves, where ink stains fingers as permanently as sin, and where illumination is more than just a metaphor. By daylight, it's a place of focus and strain. But at night, when it lies empty, it becomes something quieter, like a chapel for thoughts left unfinished.
You recall your first day at the scriptorium table.
The bench was unforgiving, the lighting uneven, and Brother Dunstone had given you the kind of glare usually reserved for unruly sheep. And yet, your gaze had kept drifting, not to the quills or scrolls, but to the slim carved wooden case sitting beside the inkstand. At first, you thought it was a stylus.
But no.
As Dunstone casually popped it open, you saw a half-dozen gleaming picks nestled inside, each shaped for a different angle of approach, like a surgeon's tools or a jeweler's set.
They're for precision, he had murmured.
You can't correct a mistake if you're distracted by grit in your teeth. You wondered if he was serious. Later, you would learn he was. Historians still argue whether such multi-tool toothpick sets were common or rare among scholarly monastics. Some suggest they were a status symbol, used only by higher-ranking scribes. Others believe they were handcrafted by the monks themselves, possibly even as a form of penance. File a sliver of horn, smooth it, shape it, sharpen it, and you just might have time to reflect on your mortal failings.
You run your fingers over the memory, like a thumb along a carved handle.
Back then, you thought it silly.
Now, you think otherwise.
Scribes here treat their toothpicks like extensions of their pens. A clean mouth, after all, means fewer distractions when illuminating marginalia with golden griffins or sleepy-looking saints. And there's nothing worse than botching a rubricated initial because of an errant barley husk stuck between your molars. Once, during Lent, Brother Aldhelm dropped his toothpick into a vat of red ink. Rather than discard it, he declared it sanctified and continued to use it daily. You still swear the tip glows faintly under candlelight. You smile at the recollection, passing through the dim corridor lined with old tapestries. One features a somewhat disproportionate St. Lawrence, his face caught between serenity and mild indigestion, a visual reminder of what happens when one overindulges in the monastery's cheese-curd pies. As you enter the small chamber off the scriptorium, the unofficial tools and repairs room, you find the walls hung with bundles of dried herbs, feathers, and scraps of bone. It smells of lavender, ink, and the faint tang of vinegar. Here is where the toothpicks are cleaned, stored, and sometimes retired.
Monks don't throw things away.
Not even toothpicks. The broken ones are saved. Some say because the ivory is too precious to waste. Others whisper that it's about memory. That each pick, once used for years, carries a bit of your spirit. That you don't discard them any more than you'd tear out a page from a psalter. One pick, displayed in a small box near the window, is rumored to have belonged to a monk who copied the entire Vulgate Bible by hand, twice. His toothpick is worn to a nub, smoothed like a pebble, its tip nearly vanished. You stare at it for a moment and wonder what thoughts it had tasted, what words it had passed through.
Behind you, the floor creaks.
Gildas again, carrying a tiny bundle wrapped in cloth. More repairs, he mutters, handing it over. Inside, 3 picks, 2 bone, 1 silver, each cracked at the base.
Too many beans, he shrugs.
Or perhaps just divine impatience. You nod solemnly, then tuck them away in the shelf labeled Awaiting Resurrection, which sounds far grander than Splinterbin.
Outside, the wind rustles the ivy on the abbey walls. You press your forehead lightly to the cool glass, gaze drifting across the garden where thyme, rosemary, and chamomile sleep beneath the moonlight.
You wonder how many other toothpicks lie buried under those plants. How many were dropped, forgotten, composted into the soil, only to rise again, faintly fragrant, in the leaves brewed for digestion teas.
You smile, just a little.
There are worse ways to be remembered. The morning sun leaks gently through stained glass, casting soft mosaics of color onto the cold stone floor as you rise from your pallet. The abbey stirs to life with a low murmur of chanting voices echoing faintly from the chapel. As you dress, the thought returns. Toothpicks, those unassuming sticks, are a small but essential part of monastic ritual. You recall how monks' diets shaped the very design of their dental tools. Simple fare, thick rye bread, salted fish, and hearty pottage. Left bits of husks and grit wedged in teeth, a constant annoyance during long hours of silent reading or prayer. And so, the humble toothpick became a discreet necessity. Interestingly, not all picks were created equal. Some were carved from boxwood, prized for its fine grain and durability. Others came from bone, ivory, or even silver, often commissioned by wealthier monks or abbots. This variety hints at an unspoken hierarchy within the abbey, a subtle status symbol nestled between the folds of habit and humility. You wander through the refectory, its long wooden tables scarred by centuries of use, imagining the quiet scraping sounds of picks between teeth while monks communed over meager meals. Here, etiquette played a delicate role. Picking one's teeth was acceptable, but ostentation was not. The etiquette manual, you've heard, was written by a particularly fastidious prior who insisted on silent, unobtrusive cleaning. Historians still argue whether these toothpicks were used more for practical hygiene or as discreet tools of contemplation. Some suggest the act of picking was a meditative pause, a ritual of mindfulness amidst the day's strict regimen. One curious tale surfaces in your mind. A monk named Brother Hildebert supposedly crafted a set of toothpicks that doubled as miniature musical instruments. Tiny flutes carved with holes, capable of soft, tinkling notes. Whether this story is fact or fanciful legend remains debated, but it adds a melodic twist to the otherwise austere image of monastic life. You pass the kitchen, the aroma of simmering herbs blending with the rustic smell of firewood and damp earth. Outside, garden beds ripple with medicinal plants, fennel, sage, and mint, harvested not just for healing but also for flavoring toothpicks. Chewing on fresh mint or sage twigs was a common way to freshen breath after meals, and some monks preferred to carry small bundles of these twigs, swapping them for plain picks when opportunity allowed. A rare treat, but one that surely brightened even the dullest of fast days. You remember that many monasteries prized cleanliness not merely for comfort but as a spiritual discipline. Caring for one's body was considered a form of respect for the divine, a sentiment that extended even to the smallest detail, like tending to your teeth. In some abbeys, you learn, toothpicks were dipped in vinegar or infused with clove oil, a primitive antiseptic practice that foreshadowed modern dental hygiene. This curious blend of practicality and piety reveals much about medieval monks' resourcefulness. As you continue your walk through the cloisters, the low hum of bees drifts in from the herb garden. Beeswax, used for candles and bookbinding, also coated some toothpicks to make them smoother and less likely to splinter, a tiny luxury that made the daily ritual more bearable. Perhaps, you muse, these little comforts were the monk's secret rebellion against the harshness of monastic life, a soft whisper of humanity beneath the strict discipline. With a faint smile, you run a finger along the worn wood of a toothpick case carved with interlacing patterns. It feels warm and familiar, like a secret kept for centuries, waiting patiently to be rediscovered. You step quietly into the monastery's infirmary, a room heavy with the scent of dried herbs and faintly sharp notes of old stone walls warmed by the morning sun. Here, the relationship between toothpicks and medicine reveals itself more clearly. The monks, ever the herbalists, didn't see toothpicks merely as grooming tools but as instruments for health, wielded in a practice where dental care was rudimentary but surprisingly thoughtful. It turns out that toothaches were a common affliction, especially given the coarse medieval diet and the occasional sweet treats smuggled in from distant lands. Without modern dentistry, monks developed various home remedies. Toothpicks soaked in clove oil were used to soothe aching gums, a practice that feels surprisingly familiar. You might smile to think that what you pick up from a modern pharmacy began as a humble toothpick in a stone abbey centuries ago. But there's more. Some toothpicks were fashioned with an eye toward more specific medical uses. For instance, monks often used slender sticks to apply herbal pastes directly into infected gums or to clear abscesses gently. Historians still argue whether this was effective or merely a hopeful folk remedy, but it reflects the monk's dedication to holistic care. You imagine the scene, a patient monk seated quietly, cheeks puffed in discomfort, while a brother carefully inserts a sharpened twig imbued with a bitter herbal salve into the troubled spot. The mix of clinical precision and spiritual calm paints a surprisingly tender picture. Monastic infirmaries doubled as early apothecaries, housing collections of botanical knowledge passed down from ancient Roman texts and Arabic scholars. These ancient texts recommended plants like yarrow, sage, and myrrh, many of which were incorporated into toothpick care. Myrrh, for example, was valued for its antiseptic properties, and it wasn't uncommon for monks to soak their toothpicks in a diluted myrrh solution to combat gum disease. The dual function of toothpicks, both practical and medicinal, speaks to a broader medieval philosophy where physical and spiritual health intertwined. You might think of it as an early form of what today we call self-care, although you'd be forgiven for chuckling at the thought of monks in heavy robes fussing over tiny sticks while trying to avoid breaking their silent vows. There's an intriguing debate among scholars about whether toothpicks were also symbolic tools. Some believe that the act of cleaning one's teeth served as a metaphor for spiritual purification, a physical gesture reinforcing inner cleanliness. Whether that's true or simply a poetic interpretation, it adds another layer to the humble toothpick story. In some monasteries, you learn, toothpicks were stored alongside relics and prayer books, kept in ornately carved cases. This reverence suggests that monks saw them not as mere tools but as extensions of their sacred daily rituals. You pause at a shelf where small bundles of dried herbs hang, still faintly fragrant. It's easy to imagine these being used to refresh breath or to flavor toothpicks, connecting culinary and medicinal traditions. Of course, not every toothpick was as refined. Some were rudimentary, roughly carved from leftover wood scraps, used out of necessity during long hours of labor in the fields. The contrast between the plain and the precious mirrors the varied lives within the monastic community, from the humble lay brothers to the scholarly abbots. You recall the story of a particular monk, Brother Anselm, who supposedly invented a toothpick case with a tiny hinge and latch, designed to keep his picks clean and ready during long pilgrimages. Whether he was truly the innovator or just a resourceful traveler, the tale highlights the practical challenges of maintaining hygiene on the road. As you leave the infirmary, you catch a faint whiff of vinegar and honey, the smells mingling in a way that's oddly comforting, a sensory bridge to a world both foreign and familiar. You find yourself wandering through the monastery's workshop, where the mundane and the meticulous intertwine. Here, the crafting of toothpicks takes on an artisanal air, with monks carving, sanding, and even decorating their tiny tools. This humble object, so easily overlooked, becomes a quiet testament to the monk's patience and creativity. You imagine a steady rhythm, the soft scrape of knife against wood, the faint scent of freshly carved boxwood filling the air. Some toothpicks bore intricate carvings, tiny crosses or vine patterns etched by steady hands during moments of quiet reflection. Others were left plain, valued for their simplicity and function. Interestingly, you discover that toothpicks doubled as subtle status markers within the abbey. While all monks used them, the quality and decoration often reflected rank or personal taste. Silver or ivory picks were rare and usually owned by the abbots or wealthier monks, whereas novices made do with plain wood or reed. You might chuckle at the thought of monks comparing their toothpick collections in secret. Ah, Brother Thomas, I see you've upgraded to a walnut pick this Lent. It's a reminder that even in austere settings, human quirks and social dynamics quietly persist. Historians still debate whether decorated toothpicks were purely functional or if they also served as spiritual objects, perhaps given as gifts or tokens of friendship. Some abbeys reportedly held toothpick exchanges during feasts, a practice that seems both charming and oddly endearing. The making process wasn't always smooth either. Wood that splintered too easily or picks that broke too soon could cause discomfort, or worse, injury. To avoid this, monks developed techniques for selecting and curing the wood, sometimes soaking sticks in vinegar or wine to harden them. This treatment not only strengthened the picks but also added a subtle aroma. A curious note, certain monasteries grew or harvested specific trees with dental care in mind. Boxwood was favored for its fine grain, but elder, hazel, and even birch found their way into toothpick crafting. Each type imparted a slightly different texture and scent, turning the act of cleaning teeth into a small ritual of sensory experience. You pause to admire a set of picks displayed in a velvet-lined case, each carved with tiny biblical scenes, telling stories from scripture in miniature relief. It's like holding a piece of medieval art, intimate and quiet. Outside, you hear the faint tolling of bells calling monks to prayer, a reminder that even these small crafts were intertwined with the daily rhythm of devotion. Another anecdote surfaces. A monk named Brother Cuthbert was said to have crafted a toothpick with a hollow handle, concealing a tiny rolled prayer inside. This clever design merged utility with faith, a whisper of private piety carried at all times. As you step back into the cloisters, you feel the weight of centuries of quiet hands carving these small sticks, each one a tiny act of care, discipline, and sometimes, a splash of creativity. You think about how even the smallest objects can carry stories, subtle hierarchies, and a touch of humor, reminding us that history's boring moments often hold the richest human details. You settle into the scriptorium, the heart of the monastery's intellectual life, where light filters softly through narrow windows onto the desks piled with vellum and ink pots. Here, among manuscripts and quills, you discover another surprising connection: toothpicks and literacy. It may seem odd, but monks sometimes used toothpicks as makeshift styluses or tools for delicate manuscript work. Their fine points were perfect for scraping away mistakes or cleaning ink off the parchment, an artful way to reuse what would otherwise be a simple hygiene tool. You imagine a patient monk gently scraping away an errant letter, his toothpick balanced delicately between fingers, while outside the quiet hum of the cloister seeps in. This practice highlights the monks' resourcefulness and reverence for their craft. But there's also a more practical side. During long hours of copying texts, monks often suffered from dry mouths caused by fasting and intense concentration. The toothpick served as a small comfort, a brief sensory relief as they worked through scripture or philosophy. Historians still argue whether toothpicks were officially considered part of the scriptorium's toolkit or if their use was an informal convenience. Either way, it shows the blurred lines between sacred work and daily life. One amusing account tells of a novice who accidentally dropped his toothpick into wet ink, creating a tiny splatter that delayed a manuscript's completion. The abbot supposedly remarked that even the smallest distraction could affect holy work, reminding monks to maintain discipline, even with their dental tools. Beyond practicality, some manuscripts include illustrations of monks holding toothpicks, suggesting their cultural importance. These images often portray the act of toothpicking as a symbol of cleanliness and discipline, a subtle nod to both physical and spiritual care. You also learn that some toothpicks were inscribed with prayers or blessings, turning them into miniature devotional objects. Imagine carrying a tiny wooden prayer with you, tucked safely away between your teeth or in your robe. The role of toothpicks in the scriptorium opens a fascinating window into the daily rhythms of monastic life, a world where the sacred and the mundane coexist in quiet harmony. You might chuckle to think that these tiny sticks help preserve not only teeth but also the precious knowledge contained in ancient texts, bridging the gap between oral hygiene and intellectual legacy.
Esse des Leitfades, the scriptorium empties, leaving only the soft scratch of quills and the faint scent of parchment.
The toothpick's humble story continues quietly in the background, an overlooked companion in the monk's journey. The evening deepens, and you wander toward the monastery's infirmary, where healing arts intertwine with spiritual care. Here, toothpicks take on yet another role, bridging hygiene and medicine in ways you might not expect. Medieval monks were often skilled herbalists, experimenting with plants to soothe ailments. You learn that toothpicks were sometimes dipped in medicinal concoctions, oils infused with herbs like sage, rosemary, or myrrh, and used to gently clean the teeth and gums, delivering subtle treatments directly where they were needed. You imagine a sick monk receiving this tender care, a delicate brush of a scented toothpick along his teeth, offering a moment of relief from the discomfort of gum disease or toothache. It's a small act, but one wrapped in the holistic approach to healing that monks practiced. Historians still debate whether this was widespread practice or limited to certain abbeys known for their medical knowledge. Either way, it illustrates how intertwined daily hygiene and healing were in medieval monastic life. There's also a charming story of Brother Anselm, the monastery's unofficial dentist, who fashioned toothpicks from willow wood because of its natural antiseptic properties. Willow, you recall, contains salicylic acid, the ancient precursor to aspirin, highlighting how nature and necessity met in a tiny stick. Interestingly, the infirmary's toothpicks were sometimes color-coded or marked to indicate their purpose. Plain wooden picks for routine cleaning, herb-soaked ones for treatment, and occasionally those dipped in wine or vinegar for their cleansing properties. You might picture a quiet scene, a nurse monk carefully selecting the right toothpick, the faint aroma of herbs mingling with candlelight and the soft murmur of prayers. These small rituals offered comfort amid suffering, blending physical care with spiritual hope. There was also an odd belief in some places that toothpicks soaked in holy water could ward off tooth decay or evil spirits. A reminder of how faith permeated every aspect of life, even dental hygiene. You smile at the thought of a monk fiercely protecting his sacred blessed toothpick, his tiny talisman against both physical and spiritual troubles. This glimpse into the infirmary underscores how something as simple as a toothpick could carry layers of meaning, practical care, and quiet devotion. As you leave, you hear the soft chanting drifting from the chapel, a steady reminder that in this world, even the smallest details were woven into a grand tapestry of belief and care. The sun is setting now, and your path leads to the monastery's refectory, where monks gather to share their simple meals. Here, the toothpick's role shifts once again, becoming a subtle tool of etiquette and social ritual. Picture a long wooden table, lit by flickering candlelight, laden with coarse bread, boiled vegetables, and occasional salted fish. After the meal, monks quietly reach for their toothpicks, not merely to clean their teeth but as part of the communal rhythm of dining. Using toothpicks was considered a mark of good manners, a discreet way to maintain cleanliness without disrupting the calm atmosphere. You imagine the soft click of wooden picks and the faint rustle of habits as monks practiced this gentle ritual. Historians still argue whether toothpicks were universally accepted at the monastic table or if some abbeys discouraged their use, fearing distraction from the sacred silence of mealtime. Either way, their presence added a layer of quiet dignity to the shared meal. In some monasteries, toothpicks were passed around in small, carved boxes, often made of ivory or bone, indicating both status and care for hygiene. These boxes were treasured possessions, sometimes decorated with intricate patterns or saintly images. One delightful anecdote speaks of a particularly absent-minded monk who accidentally flicked a toothpick into the communal stew, causing mild chaos and a good-natured scolding from the cellarer, the monk in charge of provisions. It's a reminder that even in serene settings, little mishaps kept life interesting. Beyond etiquette, toothpicks may have helped prevent the spread of certain illnesses by reducing leftover food particles that attracted bacteria. While medieval medicine was rudimentary, this simple practice showed an intuitive grasp of hygiene's importance. You also learned that some monks crafted toothpicks from local woods thought to have medicinal qualities, such as boxwood or cherry, enhancing both flavor and health benefits after meals. As you imagine the refectory growing quiet, the monks finishing their prayers before dispersing, the humble toothpick remains a small but meaningful token of care, for oneself and for others at the table. The toothpick, it seems, was more than just a tool. It was woven into the rhythms of daily life, a quiet guardian of manners and well-being amidst the steady cadence of monastic routine. You take a deep breath, sensing the gentle pulse of history, and prepare for the final step in this journey, where the story of these small wooden sticks draws slowly to a close. As night settles softly over the monastery, the last flickers of candlelight dance across the stone walls. You find yourself reflecting on the curious journey of the humble toothpick through monastic life, an unassuming tool that threads through hygiene, craftsmanship, medicine, and social ritual. This small wooden stick, often overlooked, emerges as a symbol of discipline and care, an intimate companion in the monks' daily rhythms. From the early mornings when they tended to their teeth with custom-carved picks, to the long hours in the scriptorium where toothpicks doubled as tools for delicate manuscript work, every use whispers of a mindful life. You remember the stories of medicinally infused toothpicks, delicate implements in the infirmary carrying healing herbs and holy blessings. They carried more than just physical relief. They carried faith and hope, quiet gestures in the face of human frailty. In the refectory, toothpicks offered a subtle ritual of etiquette, a shared thread among monks that tied hygiene to communal harmony and respect. You smile at the thought of the carved ivory boxes, the careful passing of these tiny objects amid whispered prayers and candlelit meals. Historians still debate the precise cultural significance of toothpicks, their origins, and whether their role in monastic life was universally embraced or varied by region and tradition. But what remains clear is their quiet persistence, an everyday tool imbued with unexpected depth. As you breathe in the cool night air, imagine the monastery settling into silence, the gentle creaks of wooden beams and the distant hoot of an owl. The toothpick story is a reminder that history's smallest details often carry the richest tales.
Now, dem se lights fort her, lädt se softness rep around you like a gentle cloak.
With the comforting hum of the night as your companion, allow your mind to drift, cradled by the soothing rhythms of the past. Rest easy. The toothpicks have done their part, quietly guarding the mouths, the manuscripts, and the lives of those who came before us. As your eyelids grow heavy, let the gentle cadence of these stories ease your thoughts. The quiet lives of monks and their tiny toothpicks remind us that even the smallest actions hold significance. You've traveled through stone cloisters, flickering candles, and whispered prayers, witnessing how daily care and devotion intertwine. Feel the weight of time soften, the soft rustle of pages turning in distant scriptoria, the faint scent of herbs and wood. Allow this serene world to lull you deeper, where the past gently cradles you in its timeless embrace. Breathe slowly, let the tranquility seep in, and drift peacefully toward rest, knowing that history's quiet moments have accompanied you tonight.